My sister stole my identity to take out a loan. She used my name, my social security number, my address, and the signature I trusted her to sign once when I was half asleep. And then she walked into a bank and walked out with money that should have been mine. It was the single sentence I could not have imagined saying 3 years earlier. Saying it aloud felt like naming a fracture in a bone. It hurt, but it made the break visible. I remember the exact moment I found out. A letter with institutional letterhead that smelled faintly of printer ink and bad news. "We regret to inform you," it began, and then a list of numbers and dates, and under all of it my name, but not the me I knew. Her handwriting, her rearranged signature, appended to the loan agreement. The bank had given her a business loan in my name. It hurt because identity is private in a way people take for granted. It hurt because I had recommended her to the bank manager 2 months earlier when she needed help with paperwork. It hurt worse because we were family, and family, I had always thought, carried its own protection and limits. We were not close in the way sisters in movies are. We didn't share clothes or secrets. We shared the same house for a while, the same old kitchen with hardwood that creaked where the floorboards were tired, and an awkward history of favors and debts. I am 6 years younger. She'd been the one to move back home after a divorce to take care of mom when she had trouble walking. People called her dependable. I called her quietly and often the reasonable one. That label was part of why I didn't demand receipts when she asked me to sign simple forms. She had a job and a kid and a history that made her ask for help. And I gave it. The backstory matters because you need to understand why I didn't simply call the police the minute I suspected fraud. She was the person mom relied on for appointments. She had keys. She knew where the originals of everything were kept. She had emotional leverage in ways other people didn't. She would show up with milk at 2 a.m. when mom forgot to take a pill. She'd fix the leaky faucet when I was at work late. I owed her for small mercies. I owed her in a way because leaving mom alone felt like abandoning a responsibility neither of us could weigh equally. The first time I noticed the change was a petty thing, a debt collection call when I was on my lunch break. "This is regarding a business line of credit opened in your name," the collector said. My stomach dropped. I asked for dates, numbers. She gave them. When I hung up, I told myself it would be a clerical error. When the second call came, a thin, polite voice from a different collection agency, I stopped pretending. I started to trace. Tracing is a slow kind of violence. It exposes every little convenience you once granted and turns it into evidence. The loan application had been processed online, but it required verification. The bank had a notarized copy of my ID attached, and the signature on the form matched the one I had signed months earlier on a consent to medical treatment form. A signature I had allowed her to replicate, thinking it was harmless. She had been there when I signed it. She had been helpful. The bank's representative, when I finally managed to get through, was apologetic in a way that hurt more than the cold facts. "We have procedures," she said. "We also rely on human verification." It kept getting worse. I found out the loan was for a business my sister had started with a man I barely knew existed. An online mattress retailer with the kind of generic name that makes a search engine blink and say, "Which one?" The store had a storefront address, which was actually a UPS box in a commercial complex. The loan payments were missing for 3 months. The loan officer's notes had little observations about co-borrower's urgency and client in crisis. My name, their written record, was attached to an entirely different life. At home, she smiled like always. She moved through the house as if nothing had changed. The contradiction between the bank's forms and the woman cutting carrots in my kitchen was the first true taste of how manipulation can live in plain sight. She never approached the subject. She never corrected me when I asked about the business in passing, as if she thought that ignorance would dissolve the debt into air. Her avoidance became another way of controlling the narrative. I reacted the way people do when their world starts to wobble. I tried to hold two things at once. I called the bank, I froze my credit, I set up fraud alerts, I told mum I was dealing with paperwork, I told myself I had time, I paced, I lost sleep. And then the first real consequence hit. My landlord called to say there was a notice on file tied to my name and my social security number. A default judgment relating to a business tax I had never signed for. It was nonsense, and yet it had teeth. My landlord said things in the tone of someone who wants to be reasonable but is already imagining the worst. "We might have to update the lease," he said. "If something's wrong with the SSN, it complicates everything." That was the point when staying felt dangerous. I could still move out if I wanted. I could have packed and left that week. But furniture cost money I didn't have because part of my savings had been in accounts tied to my name and flagged by the bank. When the collection agency sent an email with final notice in the subject line, the threat became immediate. The worst part was that walking away would have left Mom with the person clearly more capable of manipulating the household finances. So I stayed. Every week there was a new small disaster. A creditor calling about a payment I did not owe, a notice from the IRS about a filing associated with my name and that mattress company, an email requesting verification sent to an address I had never used. Each time my reaction was pragmatic and then emotional. First the phone, the forms, the online portals, then the hollow private panic. One particularly sharp escalation came when I was denied a loan I had applied for to cover a minor necessary expense. The banker's screen lit up with red flags. I sat in the chair across from her and felt my life being measured with a ruler I could not see. "Identity theft is complicated sometimes," she said. "So the way people say weather is complicated when they want to be kind but distant. The pressure built in waves. My sister began to shift in tone. She started asking for small amounts of money and always apologized. Always had some story about a supplier or a payment delayed. The first time she asked, I gave her $100 because we'd split groceries previously. The second time, it was $300 for a deposit. I logged each transfer because the bank statements were already a battleground. Watching my own generosity traced on a ledger made me feel foolish and strangely exposed. It also gave her the pretext to claim I was complicit. She said things in front of Mom like, I used Kelly's info because she told me to. She's been helping me. To Mom, it sounded plausible. To me, it sounded like gaslighting masquerading as camaraderie. I called a lawyer. That first consultation was a necessary slap of reality. The attorney, a woman with neat glasses and a calendar full of clients, laid out how identity theft cases usually proceed. You can press charges, she said. You can seek restitution, but recovery is slow. She also said something I wasn't ready to hear. We will need proof that it was your sister. The legal system wants paper, and people like my sister were careful about leaving the right mess. She had left enough to open the case. but she had also been quiet and cunning about her tracks. "We can subpoena bank records," the lawyer offered. "We can trace IPs, access points." I left with a file folder and a list of tasks and a price that made the word expensive feel like a rebuke. Back at home, the atmosphere changed. Silence became a tool. She withdrew to her room more often and then came out with a new face. One that was attentive to Mom's needs and efficient with schedules. The contradiction between the criminal record I was assembling and the domestic care she provided was the cruelest part. Mom would ask me if I was being unfair, and I'd lie by omission because explaining identity theft to a woman of her generation felt both impossible and cruel. Mom had already suffered small betrayals from life. Adding another would be cruel in a different way. Another escalation came when the bank, in an attempt to recover funds, placed a lien on the property where Mom and I lived. The lien was tied to the loan and, according to the paper, my liability. That document forced every conversation to the table. "We need to fix this," the attorney said, more plainly this time. I began to make a list of the ways my life was being squeezed, my credit score tanking, my rent threatened, my access to bank accounts restricted by fraud freezes I had requested, and an increasingly fragile relationship with Mom. The numbers on those printed pages were dry, but they translated into real choices: whether to keep the house, whether to keep Mom at home, whether to leave the only place that felt like refuge. There were moments of public humiliation. At the grocery store, I watched a man in line ahead of me refuse my card because of a flagged transaction. In the voice of the clerk, there was an accusation I could not refute. I had to step back to pay over the phone with a card nominally unblemished, feeling eyes on me like small, sharp judgments. Later, when a distant cousin mentioned casually at a family gathering that someone had defaulted on a small loan, I felt the room tilt towards suspicion. People started to whisper in that way that makes ordinary conversation a tribunal. I did not tell them that the someone in question was me only on paper. Every change she made felt calculated to keep me uncertain. She began to withhold information that mattered: phone numbers of contractors, the location of important documents, passwords. When I asked for things back, a birth certificate, a tax return, she would stall or feign confusion. She'd say, "I thought you had the originals," with a tone that implied my incompetence. She would do small, mean things like move the car keys or unread my mail. Each incident was insufficient on its own. Together they formed a pattern of exclusion. I was being squeezed out of my name by a person who lived in the same house. The situation turned inwardly corrosive. I started snapping at Mom over trivial things, which made me feel shallow and small. I resented dinners in which my sister spoke for Mom as if she had more authority. I resented the ease with which she navigated forms and appointments. I resented the way she could cry with her head tilted, and people would automatically comfort her. That resentment grew into a kind of private fury that I was ashamed to feel, because I knew she had done good things too. She had been there in bad storms. But fury is not moral calculus, it is weather. It arrived and could not be negotiated with until it turned into action. I reached a low point the winter that the furnace gave out. It was a small domestic disaster. Pipes near freezing, a mechanic's estimate in the thousands. But it became an emblem of control. I called the mechanic and the landlord and the heating contractor. Everyone sent me estimates and paperwork. My sister offered to handle it and did so in a way that left me out of the loop. The contractor showed up and fixed the furnace, then handed her a receipt and directions for a payment plan. She asked me for the paperwork like it was a favor I owed her. When I asked where the receipts were filed, she shrugged and said she'd take care of the mortgage liaison. The next week, a foreclosure notice arrived for a small missed administrative fee tied to the lien. I felt my ability to act evaporate into the bureaucracy she now controlled. That winter night, I sat on the couch and counted failure like coins. I thought about leaving the house again, but I also thought about the small daily kindnesses I could not imagine handing to a stranger. Mum's pills, the grocery runs, the dog's vet records. The house mattered because it held the life I had with Mum. The thought of giving that to someone who had proven willing to weaponize my identity felt like handing my throat to a stranger. The low point was not a crash, but a slow drainage. I lost leverage. I had the moral high ground in certain ways. Evidence, legal counsel, and the cold math of bank records. But the person closest to Mom still had the keys to the van and the numbers to the utility companies. I felt trapped in a map where the X that marked safety was held by someone else. At night, I would lie awake imagining the numbers on my credit report like dominoes waiting to fall. I would wake in the small hours and think about whether justice and survival were compatible. Then a mistake shifted everything. It was so small, I almost missed it. An email from the mattress company's payment processor that listed a phone number for a merchant account admin. It was a civil-sounding contact, a defaulted account notice. I called out of curiosity more than hope. A man answered and, in the comfortable cadence of customer service, asked me questions. Name on the account, tax ID, authorized contact. I gave them the facts as the bank records showed them. Then, offhand, he said, "We have an alternate billing address and an ACH routing set up with a bank in Queens. The paperwork lists a third-party representative named El Martinez." My heart lurched because El Martinez was a name my sister had used once, her ex-husband's mother, in passing. It was a tiny breadcrumb. I asked for a copy of the merchant application. The man was reluctant, but agreed after I explained I was the victim of identity theft. When the PDF arrived, my hands shook. The file contained a cell number and an IP trace that showed the application had been submitted from a library computer in our neighborhood on a particular Thursday at 2:13 p.m. The same day, I remembered, my sister had told me she was out running errands. I cross-checked the IP with timestamps from my own phone records. The overlap was small but concrete. The library computer logged an email sent to a supplier with my name on it, and that email had been sent from an account my sister used. That small mistake, a merchant's sloppy data retention, created a path. It gave my lawyer the line she needed to issue subpoenas. It gave the detectives a place to start. It was not a dramatic confession. It was an administrative oversight that translated into evidence. The law does not need theatrics. It needs a paper trail. The paper trail is unforgiving in its dullness. We filed a police report. The detective who took my statement was a man with patience and a voice that treated paperwork like a story to be read carefully. He asked me precise questions, dates, places, amounts. I answered. He also asked about family dynamics. I told him what I could and omitted what would hurt Mom unnecessarily. He asked for bank statements and copies of the loan application. He checked my file and then, much later, called to say they had probable cause to obtain search warrants for the library computer logs and for my sister's phone records. The word warrant felt procedural and momentous at the same time. The turning point was not dramatic in the cinematic sense. There was no confrontation with a confession. There was a stack of court orders and a clerk who handed me copies of records I had not expected to see. There, in municipal logs, were entries that placed the application submission. At times, my sister had claimed to be elsewhere. There were records of her phone pinging off towers near the library. There were even a couple of text messages she had sent, meant for a friend, complaining about how messy the admin stuff is and mentioning my name in a way that read like guilt disguised as annoyance. She called me the night the warrants were served. I was standing in the kitchen with a pile of subpoena copies. She said she was sorry in a voice that had the practiced edges of someone trying on remorse. Kelly, I didn't mean it to get this far, she said. I listened without interrupting. The detective had told me to avoid contact, but she called anyway. She said the word sorry and then tried to fold the blame into stress, into the chaos of a startup. The way she described it was small and urgent and greedy. She needed money for an inventory order, she said. And she panicked. She suggested we could fix it between us. She offered to pay me back in installments if I would handle it quietly. I recorded the call and turned it over to the detective. Recording felt like a betrayal, but the law had become the only neutral party left. The recording was not theatrical. It was the voice of a woman trying to salvage her dignity in a room of her own making. It contained admissions that matched the paper trail. The state prosecutor later told me that it was the simplest kind of evidence. Not dramatic, just consistent. The legal process that followed was long and contained no small number of disappointments. My sister was arrested and charged with identity theft, fraud, and related counts. The arraignment was noisy and procedural. I sat in the gallery and felt every possible ache, the humiliation, the relief, the sorrow. The prosecutor offered a plea deal for restitution and a reduced sentence if she accepted responsibility. She refused. She said in court that she had been trying to save a business and had not meant to hurt family. The judge responded with something measured and without melodrama. The law considers intent alongside harm, the judge said, but harm was done. She set a schedule for discovery and hearings. What followed were consequences that looked like ordinary institutions doing their job. The bank pursued the borrower, not the household. A civil suit recovered a portion of the loan. A settlement covered some of my damages and paid for credit repair services. My lawyer negotiated an arrangement that left my name clearer over time. The IRS audit flagged the fraudulent returns and reassessed them, then corrected them. Credit agencies removed the fraudulent accounts after my attorney proved the theft. The lien on the house was eventually lifted once the bank acknowledged the loan had been made without my informed consent. Those are the dry sentences in a long paragraph that had once felt suffocating. Criminally, my sister received a sentence that included community service, restitution, and a period of probation. She was ordered to attend financial counselling and prohibited from accessing certain types of accounts. It was not revenge in a cinematic sense. It did not erase the months of anxiety or the small humiliations. It was, however, an action taken by institutions intended to hold people accountable. The law moved in a way that felt both slow and decisive. It offered structure to what had been chaotic. It did not, and could not, restore trust. The personal fallout was more complex. Mom was angry and hurt, and then she was protective in a way that made me see her through new eyes. She had been manipulated too, but she also felt betrayed by the public nature of the proceedings. Family members took sides. Some avoided the house altogether. Others visited and whispered condolences, which felt like another kind of judgment. My sister and I ceased speaking, except through lawyers, for a long time. There were visits mediated by social workers where she read aloud statements of remorse and I listened, making sure the words were real and not just performance. Her apology was sometimes sincere, sometimes brittle. It was always complicated. I lost things that mattered beyond money. There was a softness between my sister and me that had been eroded. There were holidays we would not share. There were conversations that would never happen again. Yet the house remained, and Mom remained, and our daily routine returned to something approximating normal. Mom forgot some details, as she always had. Some days she looked at me and did not remember the shape of this long fight. That was both a mercy and a cruelty I have had to accept. One outcome I did not anticipate was the small change in how I handled trust. I started keeping copies of everything in a fireproof box and scanning documents into a cloud account. I stopped lending my signature casually. I learned to say no in bureaucratic ways, written refusal, certified mail. The boundaries were technical at first, passwords, alerts, double verifications, but they settled into the way I moved through daily life. I did not feel more cynical, I felt more cautious. In a household full of shared responsibilities, caution is a kind of armor. There were also ordinary acts of rebuilding. The bank corrected my credit report within months, and a lender later approved a small personal loan to help with deferred bills. I took on extra shifts at work for a while, not out of penance, but out of necessity. I learned how to read a contract line by line instead of lip-reading the person who handed it to me. The small practical skills of recovery are unromantic but essential. How to call credit bureaus, how to file a police report, how to document every phone call with a time and a name. The sister I knew before this had genuine care in her, and I do not pretend her crimes belong only to a single narrative. She had been under enormous stress before she made the choice to use my identity. That does not excuse the harm. It contextualizes it. And contextualization is not absolution. It is a means of understanding that people break in different ways, that small kindnesses from the past do not justify a theft that ripples outward. The law did what it was meant to do. It established consequences and a path toward restitution. It did not fix everything, nor could it. What surprised me in the quiet after was how ordinary life resumed its shapes. The dog still needed walks. Mum still preferred her tea at 2. The furnace eventually lasted another winter. Routine has a way of collapsing the extraordinary into the manageable. I do not have the blunt closure some people imagine. My sister paid back part of what she owed to the bank and to me. She performed court-mandated community service and attended counselling. We live in the same town but not in the same house now. The distance is not a punishment prescribed by law. It is a boundary I needed, practical and protective. We are, for the foreseeable future, siblings at a remove. There are emails about Mum's pill schedule and the occasional mediated conversation when schedules require it. Those interactions are spare and efficient, like receipts exchanged across a table. If there is a single unexpected comfort in all of it, it is the way the legal process can be quietly humane when it is administered well. The detective who handled my case was careful to respect Mum's dignity. The prosecutor made clear choices that balanced consequences with rehabilitation. The judge gave a sentence that acknowledged harm while recognizing the possibility that my sister could rebuild a life without recurring to theft. There is no dramatic moral triumph. There is a set of institutions doing incremental repair. That is not the stuff of movies, but it was what I needed. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I still think about the signatures. The one I made on a form in a sleepy haze and the way she copied it. The way a line of ink can become a legal instrument. I think about how small acts of trust can be used as leverage by someone you thought you knew. I think about how the world's systems, banks, courts, credit agencies are built on a combination of paper and faith, and how easily either can be fractured. I have learned to hold my name differently now. I guard it not with anger, but with attention. I am less willing to give away parts of myself that turn out to be expensive to reclaim. I do not want to sound sanctimonious. The truth is more practical. Names have value, and that value is real in ways that matter when institutions base lending and trust on them. Protecting that value is a combination of procedural vigilance and hard conversations. It's not poetic, it is paperwork. When people ask me whether I'm glad I let the law handle her, I give an answer that is small and careful. If I had tried to manage it privately, I might have paid her back and kept quiet. I might have given in to appeals and familial pressure until my name was a stain. Choosing the law was a way to remove the personal calculus from the process. It allowed an impartial system to evaluate the harm. The law provided structure, made demands, and set consequences that did not depend on my willingness to forgive. It was not cold, it was procedural. It was what restored a portion of my life. There is no cathartic ending. There is no glorious reunion staged at a courtroom door. There is instead the slow accretion of days in which the paperwork is corrected, the mail is in my name again, and the calls from collection agencies become fewer and then stop. There is the way Mum's laugh returns after a spell, the way the dog still curls up on my feet when the house is quiet. There is the ongoing negotiation of trust. If you look closely, you will see signs of the cost. Therapy bills, small account flags, revised estate plans. Those are practical realities. They are not the whole story, but they are part of rebuilding a life that was unmade in small, legalistic ways. The healing is not dramatic. It is steady and quiet. The law did not give me back what I had lost emotionally in my sister's betrayal, but it gave me a system that acknowledged the harm and imposed consequences. That mattered. I do not want to end with a moral. I will say instead what is true for me. I am not the same person at the center of this story as I was before. My name is once again mine on paper and in practice. The family is different, frayed, practical, careful. My sister is living a sentence that includes making amends. I am living with boundaries that protect my life and Mum's. The hurt is still present, but it is no longer raw. If you listen this far, thank you. If this resonates, maybe leave a like so others can find it. If you want to hear more stories like this, consider subscribing. And if you've ever had something like this happen to you, or you have a question about how I navigated the legal side, leave a comment below. I'll read them.